Welcome, everyone, to the How to Get the Most Out of College podcast. There's a lot of talk about where to go to college, but not nearly enough about how to go to college. And it's the everyday decisions that drive your success. I'm your host, Elliot Felix. I've been a consultant to more than 100 colleges and universities, helping them improve their student experience. And I'm the author of How to Get the Most Out of College, where I take what I've learned about how college works and make it work for you. The college tour is such an important and magical moment in the college search process where you're forming your first impressions and you're understanding a little bit about yourself, you're understanding a little bit about the college, you're imagining yourself there. And so I'm so excited to dig into this topic with Mark Stucker, who's one of the hosts of the Your College Bound Kid podcast and the founder of School Match for You. Mark has an amazing blog post called How to Prepare for Your College Visit that we're going to use and touch on throughout this, and we'll put it in the show notes. But I want to go straight to the source and hear from Mark about how students and families can make the most of their college visit. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Elliot. Thanks for having me. Yeah, just a little bit about myself. Married for 32 years, have 26 and 24-year-old college grads, both living in North Carolina. Got into college admissions in the early 90s in Dallas, Texas. Worked for a year at a college, but it was not a very selective college and didn't have the best experience because a lot of financial issues the college had. So 10 years later, I returned back to admissions, this time boarding school admissions in Pennsylvania outside of Philly. 01 to 09, I was a associate director of admissions and chair of admissions committee for 5 years, as well as an adjunct college counselor. And then the last 14 years, I've been in Atlanta. I was either director of admissions at the KIPP through college, and then I started School Match for You 14 years ago as well. And 7 years ago, I launched a book that's up on Amazon called 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions. And 6 years ago, as of this week, we started Your College Bound Kid, and next episode will be the Big 300. So it's been a lot of fun.
That is really exciting. This topic, I think, is such a fun one to dig into. And to make it concrete, I would love to hear a story, maybe of a family you worked with that absolutely crushed the college visit.
Sure. So I'm really big on going beyond what you're spoon-fed. So the typical tour, you go online, you go to the admission section, you sign up. It's usually an information session and a tour. Some of them I'll give you a few more options. I give you the option, do you want to meet with an admission officer afterward? Do you want to attend a class? Is there somebody you want to meet? But that's not standard. That's sort of going beyond and above. But I want people to customize it. And my favorite thing to do, although it really depends on the person, is to have students randomly just start talking to other students. And so one of the students I was working with 2 years ago, she's now a sophomore in college. She was at a very selective New England school on a tour, and she was really loving this. I know because she was blowing up my phone with texts. So she was telling me about the info session, and she's very exuberant personality type. And so she's telling me all the things that they're saying in the info session. And then on the tour, she's telling me the same thing. And so in my mind, I'm starting to think, oh, this probably looks like this might be an early decision option. So binding commitment. And then some time passed by. And then afterward, the next meeting we had, we're going over her list, and this school's not even on it anymore. So what happened was she took my advice and started randomly talking to students after the tour was over. She talked to 10 to 12, and I'm not going to mention the name of the school, but she started getting a completely different picture on a couple of things, how stressed out the students were, how extreme it was. She felt politically to one extreme, and she's more of a centrist person. And she just got a totally different picture, so much so to the point where she took the school off of the list. And while that may seem like a negative story, neither one of us looked at it that way. Her thoughts were, I am so glad I learned what I learned now, versus I could have been a potential transfer person. Had I just done what most people do, info session tour, bounced on out, got onto another school, I would have missed so many things that I was able to capture by having these real authentic conversations with students and learning so much that the admission officers really weren't going to share with me in that more formal setting.
I think it's such a great story because for me, how to get the most out of the tour is a lot of how to get the most out of the college experience once they're there, right? Because you're talking about how do you go off the script? How do you go above and beyond? How do you customize it for you? And I think, making the most of your college experience starts when you're touring the school. And I love this. It sounds like the meta advice is to like go beyond the tour and go beyond what's kind of the scripted information, do your own research, make your own connections. I love that idea. What are some ways, you mentioned just start randomly asking students, in addition to, the random discovery, what are some things that students and families do to increase the likelihood of making some of those discoveries? Like what else should they do to go beyond the tour?
Sure. So this is going to be very different from one person to the next. Starts with brainstorming what is important to me in a school. And literally, this could be 100 things. So for one person, they could have a peanut allergy and they want to have a meeting with a head of food service to find out to what extent will you be able to customize a meal to my allergies so that I don't end up in the hospital.
That's
So,
exactly what I did, by the way.
wow. What, end up in the hospital or customize the meal? Which one?
Met
Or
with food
customize the
service. I ended up working in the dining hall. And
Wow.
part of working in the dining hall my first year was I needed the money, but B, it was
Sure.
a survival strategy because then I knew all the cooks and they cooked for me and they knew me personally and they knew to switch gloves and switch spoons and, not kill our friend Elliot.
Wow.
I love the random chance of that
Yeah,
example.
what are the chances? Somebody else is like hardcore in robotics and they want to meet with somebody in that department, find out what the opportunities are. Someone else is all about study abroad. They would really like to have an opportunity in Norway or Denmark and they want to know what that opportunity is like. Somebody else is really intrigued by the honors college and they'd like to meet with somebody over that to find out how the honors college differs from other honors colleges and what are the benefits and perks and things like that. So it just goes on and on. Someone else, it's a coach. Somebody else, it's a classroom experience in a particular area of interest. Somebody else, it's learning disabilities that they have. And so they want to meet with somebody there. Someone else, it's the academic support center. And it just goes on Res Life. It just goes on and on and on. So it's starting with what's important to you. And then it is identifying the person or persons that would be overseeing that. And then it's scheduling appointments ahead of time. So this could involve some planning and some calculation. And one of the mistakes people make is they just try to speed dial, almost like speed date tours, and they try to jam too many in. And I realize it's hard because you have limited time, but I would rather see people really put more research on the front end. There is a lot you can do from the computer and ferret out who you're really more serious about and then do a deeper dive and a deeper exploration. And so that's why, like literally I could have taken up all the time here bouncing around from topic to topic about all the different people who it may or may not make sense for somebody to meet. And it's just completely customizable to what is important to that individual.
Yeah, I think starting with what's important to you makes sense. So you're filtering things. And I think it's great to have in your post, you have a whole slew of examples, right? Having a meal, meeting with representatives, going to the multicultural center, touring specific spaces, meeting professors, going to a class. I think that can be a kind of a menu and people can think about their interests and they can choose from the menu or invent their own item. And to do this, should they just reach out to folks directly and find their name online and say, hey, can we meet with you at 2:30 on Wednesday?
Yeah, so it's two ways to do it. My preference is that way that you mentioned is to find somebody. A lot of times, if it's a faculty member or if it's an area of interest, then the person can be so incredibly excited about, wow, this person is interested in my subject matter. They may say, hey, listen, I'm not available now, but I know somebody who will. Some schools are set up so that the admission office will do all that for you and they'll sort of offer that or you can request it. And there's pros and cons to that approach. The pros are that they have ferreted out somebody who is willing to serve in that role, and you're less likely to run into red tape, obstacles, obstruction. So that could be a smooth encounter. The negative to it is it's part of the crafting of the experience,
Yeah,
right?
now you're in the scripted territory again.
Correct. You're
Yeah.
into the scripted territory. And so if you just do it sort of on your own, you do get a better chance to sort of see like what kind of level of responsiveness do I get? What's the experience like? And so I lean in that direction, but I've seen both work. And for some individuals, they may be more comfortable with the admissions approach, but not every admission office is going to do that either. So it can vary. It's always the $1 million question to try to channel it to the admission office or just go direct.
Yeah, pros and cons of
Mhm.
each. We've talked about going beyond the tour and setting up meetings, talking to people. That seems like an important first step. But now let's talk about what are those conversations like? And I know on
Mm,
the post you talk about maybe coming up with some questions. Now you've got
sure.
the professor you want to talk to, you're in the multicultural center, you're at the veteran center, you're in the dining hall. How do you prepare for those conversations?
Yeah. And once again, this is very different between what I asked in terms of talking just to random students, which I always like people to do. And for there, I like people to go to a place where there's a lot of traffic. This is what I do too. In fact, I just have a podcast just going live this week where I talked about doing this 17 years ago on Swarthmore's campus and having a great conversation with a student that was on a domestic exchange from Pomona. So for there, I like to find busy places and you can ask students, hey, where's the traffic? Sometimes it's a student center, sometimes it's a place outside for a quad. But if you're talking about more what we're talking about here, more of the programmatic stuff or an area of need, it's back to brainstorming again because it's all about what's important to you. So if we just take a scenario, let's say it's the Academic Success Center. Two students could have two completely different needs. One student might want to know what's the support like for writing. Someone else might want to know like tutoring. Was the peer tutoring? Is it paid tutoring? Is it, my funds are tight? Is it included in all my costs? Are there extra fees? Is there a speed reading course? I'm interested in that. That's something I took when I was at Michigan State that helped me a lot. And so once again, it all starts with what are my needs and then crafting questions to figure out whether or not you're going to be able to meet my needs. Now, one thing that can be really helpful is if somebody identifies a particular need that they have. So let's just say it's someone with ADHD and they want to know what supports are in place there. It can be very helpful to do the same thing at multiple schools and get a sense of how the supports or lack thereof compare from one school to the next. But it's hard when you're talking about those professionals or those services to just say, okay, these are my 3 to 4 questions that work. I can give people really good 5 to 6 questions that are great for talking to students. They're not the only ones, but they're proven winners. But when it comes to you identifying what your needs are and what the questions are going to be, I'll give you another example. Let's say my thing is athletics. I really want to play here. So now I'm meeting with the coach. Well, in one case, it could be what's your training regiment? What's your roster look like? What type of opportunities are going to be available? When's your timeline of when you commit? And for somebody else, it could be completely different. They could be really into travel. They want to know what the travel routine is. What are you doing over your summers? Maybe they're really into nutrition. What's your weight training program? So those are like examples of two people that could have completely different questions based on what their needs are.
And so starting with you and your needs sounds like
Mm,
the key way to
yep.
customize it. Do you have any recommendations on how students and families should get at that? Is there like an assessment? Are there like reflection
Mhm.
questions? How should they uncover what those needs are so they know they can focus on them?
Yeah, one thing is good is to whoever is guiding you in this process or whoever knows you really well. And in some cases, that's a parent. In cases, it's a sibling. In some cases, it's a best friend. In some cases, it's a college counselor. But start with someone who knows you well and do kind of like a brainstorming with them and say, listen, I kind of know that I think this is a sport that I might be interested in playing or a team I may be interested in playing. What kind of questions do you think I should ask? So it starts with somebody who knows you well. Hopefully, someone with a little bit of expertise in that area can be helpful as well. And having a partner so not all the brainstorming has to be completely reliant on you.
That's great. One thing that I find in my work when we're doing discovery work, when we're doing assessment work on student experience is that some things you can learn by asking, but other things you have to learn by observing because, people might not always be able to articulate something or they might say one thing and do another. How do you sort that out? How do you filter that? Or how do you observe and see things firsthand?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Elliot. There's a lot of things I like to do. I like when possible for families to have a meal in the dining room and just people watch and observe. This is another reason why I like to go into highly trafficked areas and just get a sense of the vibe, the zeitgeist of the place. I'm somebody who's really big in trusting your gut. I can remember it was like 2003. I was adjunct college counselor at the boarding school. I was director of admission. I was talking to this one student and I was going on and on about this student. I was so enthusiastic, but I was explaining to this other student how, the student's just so completely torn on their decision. but they have all these great options. And then the student said, poor girl, she needs to just trust her gut. And it always stuck with me, because she's literally being pulled in all kinds of different directions, as a friend of the student too. So I'm big on that. I'm big on trusting your instincts, but a lot of times when people go on these tours, they go on so many, and it's hard because you don't have that much time. And so after a while, they really do begin to merge and mesh together. And so that's why I'm big on reflection. I'm big on journaling. I'm big on having a recorder, record your impressions afterward, take a camera, take key pictures of things, grab newspapers when you see them on campus. And certainly you should be doing other things like looking newspapers up in advance. I'll give you an example. I was just at Whittier College in Whittier, California. Well, they just canceled their football program after 115 years. So I picked up the school newspaper, and I've never seen this ever, doing this for 24 years. It was a 7-page newspaper. Every single article was on the cancellation of football. Every single one for the whole entire edition. And obviously, as I started intermingling with students, it was a very loud voice and a very loud presence on campus of, I cannot believe they did this. They didn't warn us, and obviously, I'm not trying to throw the school in the bus. There are a lot of other really, really outstanding things as well, but it's an example that I think proves the point, so getting to that culture. But I do like to be around heavily trafficked areas, and a great place to go is the dining room, the student center for that kind of thing.
Well, that's great. We've talked about before the tour, doing the thinking, understanding your needs, preparing questions, making connections. Then we've talked about during the tour, it's the visit, it's the info session, but it's going beyond that and having these meetings and going to these places. In our last bit here, can you talk a little bit about how to make the most of the visit afterwards? What do you do after?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So part of it was what I just said, which is this reflection piece. So I like people to get away from parents before you start comparing notes. And whatever your thing is, whether it's journal, whether it's putting some notes in your phone app, what I like to do is grab my iPhone, hit the voice memo, and just sort of record my impressions. It's very, very helpful. So I like to do that before you start having conversations with, what does the brother think? What's mom? What does dad think? Whoever's with you on the tour. Another thing is constantly getting contact information for the people you interact with. So let's say you've arranged to sit in the class. Would it be okay if you followed up with a professor? Tour guide. Would it be okay if I could get your email? Whoever it is, all the different people we've met with. Most of the time, if you ask them, would it be okay if I had an additional follow-up question if I followed up with you? They're almost always going to say yes. A lot of times, tour guides will actually have cards made up with that information that's on there. And once again, in your random conversations with students, while I try to be really respectful of the time, I usually ask, would it be okay if I ask you 2 to 3 questions? I ask this now. I'm a college counselor. I'm trying to get to know the school, or I'm a junior and I'm seriously considering applying to the school. They were in your seat recently. 90 to 95% of the time, they'll be friendly. The only time really you encounter issues is when someone's really rushed. Sorry, running late. But you treat people nice, you get that back. But what happens is somewhere between 1 to 5 to 1 to 10 is a real talker. And they just love it. They act like you're doing a favor for them. And for those people, ask, would it be okay if I, got your email in case I have any follow-up questions? It's really helpful to have points of contact you can follow up with later. Because if it's a school you're genuinely interested in, there's a good chance that other questions will emerge. And then sometimes if it's with students, you can work a network. So let's say you want to talk to somebody in engineering because you're seriously thinking about engineering. And let's say you go through the admission office. You say, I'd love to talk to an engineering student, and they make arrangements for you to do that. Then you do that, and you have a good conversation and say, did you have a friend? Because I'd love to just continue to get some other perspectives. And you can just work a network that way. But it's about getting that contact information so that now you have points to follow up.
Well, this is great advice about before, during, and after the visit and how to make the most of it and how to follow the script, but to go beyond the script to make it your own and to get the most out of it. And Mark, I really appreciate your time and insights. Thank you so much.
No, you're welcome. And I really believe we wouldn't have 37% of people transferring if people really, put this time in on the front end. So for all the listeners out there, go for it on your tour. Thanks, Elliot.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. Remember to subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And check out elliottfelix.com for all the episodes and the articles I've written, talks I've given, and more information about the book.